checkpoint questions here, and then we'll keep going. So the first question, name the two stimuli for ADH release from the posterior pituitary. And really stressing on the word release here. So it's not being secreted or made or synthesized from the posterior pituitary. It is only being released, right? It is actually being made up in the hypothalamus where those sensory triggers are coming in and then released from the posterior pituitary. So what are the two stimuli that we said were responsible for ADH release? Excellent, yes, so decreased baroreceptor activity, lower blood volumes, creating less of a stretch on those baroreceptors, which indicates that we have less blood volume and blood pressure, and so we secrete ADH as a way to correct that, okay? What was the second trigger or stimulus for ADH release? So one was the baroreceptors and low blood volume. Okay, the other one was the osmoreceptors and high plasma osmolarity. Okay, so the osmoreceptors in the OVLT, they detect high plasma osmolarity. In other words, very concentrated plasma, which has little water and more solids, right? A lot of solids. Okay, so osmoreceptors detecting high plasma osmolarity and baroreceptors detecting low blood volume. And the second question, describe the effects of ADH on principal cells. So just to kind of reiterate the flow here, principal cells are located in the distal tubule collecting duct. They have these specific receptors for ADH. So when ADH binds to this principal cell, via that second messenger pathway system, we go from that receptor, adenylyl cyclase, cyclic AMP, our protein kinase, and then we insert more aquaporin 2 channels into the apical surface of the membrane. That allows for more water to be moved from the tubule, where it would have otherwise been lost as urine. We can move that water back into our vasculature as an effect of ADH, okay? And again, one easy way that I think about ADH, so we're going to talk about aldosterone, we're going to talk about angiotensin 2, we're going to talk about ANP, and kind of funnily or interestingly, all of these hormones start with an A. So one way to kind of set ADH apart is think about antidiuretic, right? Antidiuresis, preventing water loss, as a way to differentiate this hormone from some of the other hormones that we'll talk about, which also start with an A, and students often confuse these hormones, you know. And so ADH, antidiuresis, preventing water loss by inserting those aquaporin 2 channels. All right. Okay, let's look at a few checkpoint questions here. And that will probably all that we get through today. So I'll launch a poll. All right, last few seconds here. All right, let's see. Okay, so a lot of response for C. Which of the following statements about ADH is incorrect? Okay, and C is correct. So ADH is secreted by the anterior lobe of the pituitary gland. That is not a correct statement. it is in fact the posterior lobe of the pituitary gland, okay? The other three statements are right. So it helps stimulate the synthesis of aquaporin 2. It acts on the tubular cells by binding to receptors on the basolateral surface. And then D, although we did not speak about diabetes insipidus, this is where we have watery urine. All right, and if you remember me talking about before, earlier physiologists tasting the urine to determine if diabetes was present, this is how we get those two main categories of diabetes. So there's diabetes mellitus. If the urine is sweet, that means there's glucose in the urine. If the urine is watery, insipidus means watery. So this is another class of diabetes that is caused by excessive amounts of ADH. And if we have inappropriate secretion of ADH, usually because of tumors in the brain, we can inappropriately diurese, right? We can inappropriately lose excess amounts of water, and this creates a very watery urine. And because these weird physiologists used to taste the urine, they label this as diabetes insipidus, which means watery urine, right? Insipidus means watery. Okay, and so the answer here was C. All right, let's look at another question here. All right, final 2 or 3 seconds. All right, let's see. Okay, a lot of response for B. Which of the following is not one of the ways in which plasma and the external environment can exchange materials? Okay, a lot of response for B, which is exchange with the portal circulation of the liver, right? So that even sounds wrong, and it is wrong, okay? So there's no exchange with the external environment happening across the portal circulation and the liver, okay? There is exchange happening across the lumen of the GI, so we go from the lumen into the GI, that's external to internal, across the lumen of the renal tubules, right? So we go from the urine across into the urethra and the ureters and so on. That is exchange into the external environment. And then lastly, loss of materials through sweating, hemorrhage, and then insensible loss through respiration. All right, so B is correct. That is not an exchange between external